pros again. We are on. Yep. Okay.
Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest. Before I do that, here's a quote just for this episode. Pure self-reliance is a myth, but systemic change without personal change is hollow and dispiriting and ultimately cannot work. It's true that people need to act on their own behalf, but individuals do not develop such dogged self determination until someone or some institution first helps them grasp that their effort is integral to achieving that goal. It is this core conviction that allows them to endure as they encounter barriers along the way. This precondition is agency. Our guest today is an author of an amazing book that I've read recently. I had the honor of learning from them as they spoke on a panel at the Alliance of Responsible Citizenship in London. The book is Agency, the 4-point plan for children to overcome the victim narrative and discover their, I put the book down as I'm
Way
reading
to
it. So
power.
their way to power. Ian Rowe, thank you for your service over the decades as a leader, as a strategist, as a mentor, as a principal and a leader, or a CEO, rather, a CEO and principal leader of this amazing network of schools and the founder of Vertex Partnership Academies. I can't wait to share with our audience all the work that you've done and what you're doing to make the world a better place. So, and many of our listeners have stories that align with your work and are in the process of overcoming or have, like our buddy, that my buddy I was telling you about. So thanks for coming on the show.
Well, Jason, my gosh, thank you for having me on. And goodness, what a great introduction. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
I'm thinking first, because I was preparing, watching one of your interviews, July 11th, 2016, 4 p.m.
Wow,
You have an epiphany
that
that
was a
changes the
defining moment.
trajectory. So what happened then, and what's so powerful about that moment that our audience needs to take?
Wow. Wow. Well, wow, that's great that you chose that moment. Well, first of all, again, thank you for having me on. That moment. So I probably had two moments in my life. We can speak about the earlier one, but it's a moment that when it occurs, when you experience it, you can't go back to the life that you had because something that you've seen um, just changes your worldview, and changes the way, at least in my instance, the role that I wanted to play in achieving the outcomes that I want, which is to create more opportunity for more young people around the world. At that point in July 2016, I had been running public charter schools in New York City, in the heart of the South Bronx, for 6 years. Um, and we'd done some amazing things. We'd created opportunity for kids in districts where the graduation rate, the college readiness rate was only 7%. Imagine growing up in a neighborhood where of the thousands of kids that started ninth grade, only 7% graduated from high school ready for college. So those are the exact communities we wanted to build great schools to create more options. And it was amazing. We each year when we opened up what's called our lottery, because our schools were oversubscribed. So we were public charter schools. We maybe had 100 to 200 seats open each year, but we had nearly 5,000 families
Wow.
applying. So the most bittersweet thing, so it's a wonderful thing to call about 100, 200 families. You got the golden ticket, your kid got into our school, but then send a note to nearly 5,000 families that the best we could do is put your name, put your kid's name on this excruciatingly long wait list. So it really reminded us of just how important our work was. Especially in places like the Bronx. And, there's the Bronx, there's Appalachia, there's Los Angeles, there's Denver, there are places all over the country that have this kind of demand. And so we decided during this year, 2016, to move our headquarters from Tribeca in Manhattan, very she.
Yeah, I worked there once.
Oh, you did? Right, right, right. So we were right on the corner of, West Broadway and Chambers, very cool, very hip, but decided to move our headquarters to 149th Street and 3rd Avenue in the South Bronx, because that's where all of our future growth was going to be, because demand was so high and we wanted to have more schools in communities that really needed it. So, but 149th Street and 3rd Avenue for some people, that's pretty uncomfortable because it is a higher crime area. There are definitely more people facing challenges. And so, in order to get to know the neighborhood, I took my team for a walking tour. And that's when we're getting
Mm,
close to July 11th, 2016 at 4 p.m. Because as we took this walking tour to get to know the neighborhood, where's the local bodega? Where's the local deli? Where's the local bank? Um, we got to 149th Street and just off 3rd Avenue. And in the distance, I see this 27-foot baby blue Winnebago truck. And there are all these people standing around these trucks, adults, very excited that it's there, laughing and joking. It's similar to when the ice cream truck shows up
yeah.
in your neighborhood and little kids are so excited, right? But this was clearly
Wow.
adults, grown-ups. And as I get closer to the truck, you can see on the side of the truck is graffiti lettering. And the graffiti lettering said, "Who's your daddy?" Like, who's your daddy? Like, what is
Huh.
that? And as we got closer and I started talking to the people, we realized that the Who's Your Daddy truck was this hub of activity. It turns out it's a mobile DNA testing center.
Mm,
Low-income folks were spending somewhere between $300 and $500 to do DNA tests to answer questions like, could you be my sister? Are you my father? Very profound questions around identity. And there was something about seeing the normalcy of that truck that just put me in a whole different place. I mean, I'd run schools at that point for
mm,
6 years. And so I knew that, family structure, challenged families was an issue. But there was something about seeing it that vibrantly. And then as I got to know, I learned more about Jared Rosenthal, who was the entrepreneur who had launched this truck. He was
wow.
feeling this need. There was a second truck that he was now taking to places like Chicago, Washington, D.C., all over the country because demand was so high. And even VH1 did a reality show on the truck called Swab Stories, where
Wow.
each week, will you find out if Janice discovers if her boyfriend, is actually related to her? Almost entertainment,
Holy. Wow.
right? This was an actual show on VH1 calls because on the truck they did these DNA tests by doing a swab. And so at that stage, I realized I discovered that the non-marital birth rate in that community was nearly 9 in 10. It was 84.5%. So basically, nearly 9 in 10 babies were born outside of marriage. And I
Wow.
said, I had always thought running great schools was the key ingredient to creating more opportunity for young people. And it is, it's necessary, but not sufficient. And so I decided that our schools had to play a different role in helping young people think differently about it wasn't about the family that you're from, but you have far greater control over the family that you are on the pathway to form. And that just
Mm,
put me in a whole different place of this concept of agency, helping young people understand that it's not about their conditions, it's about the decisions that they make that can make all the difference in their own lives.
Quote, individuals do not develop such dogged self-determination until someone or some institution first helps them grasp that.
Yeah.
So where's the intersection? How do you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, in my role, for 30 years, I mean, I have to say I'm very blessed in the things that I've done over the course of my career. I mean, I run schools now, but before then, I was at Teach for America in the early days, helping to place outstanding teachers in low-income communities across the country. I went to New York City public schools myself. I worked for the Gates Foundation. I was at the White House. I worked at MTV for 6 years, um, creating some of the most popular shows, speaking to young people about issues in their lives. And in my experience, I have seen kids, I've worked with every kind of kid, black kids, white kids, Asian kids, Hispanic kids, poor kids, rich kids, kids in homeless shelters, kids who've experienced domestic violence. And as I saw young teenagers start making their decisions into young adulthood, I saw kids from some of the most terrible situations, unfortunately, make the same kinds of decisions where they recreated the same disadvantage that they
Mm,
experienced. They had grown up in a single parent household with all sorts of challenges, and they had kids early outside of marriage and experienced poverty and violence, and it's really tragic when you see that because you could almost see it. You can almost see the writing on the wall that they just had a mindset where this is all there is. This is going to be my life too. And yet, in my 30 years, I saw young people in the same kinds of situations make different sets of decisions, right? They had a different future orientation. And the the animating question of my life has become what makes the difference? What makes the difference between a young person who's able to see their future differently, right? And and that's where this
mm,
concept of agency came from, that the young people able to break the cycle of disadvantage usually had a sense of personal agency, that they had a sense that they could lead a self-determined life of meaning and purpose, that they had some greater control over their own destiny. But that sense of agency didn't come from nowhere. It came from this idea that there were these institutions that they embraced, and I'll talk about why these four pillars, these four institutions, um, made a difference. So the first was that regardless of the family that you're from, the dysfunction, these young people able to break the cycle of disadvantage were on a pathway to form a different family. That's why we teach something in our schools called the success sequence.
mm,
Success sequence is data that says if a young person finishes at least a high school degree, not even necessarily college, but at least a high school degree, then gets a full-time job of any kind, so they learn the dignity and discipline of work. And then if they have children, if they get married first, young people who make decisions in that order, education, work, marriage, and children, 97% avoid poverty. And the vast majority enter the middle class or beyond. That's something we actually teach in our schools, and we can talk about that somewhat controversial, but we feel it's really powerful so young people can know when it comes to family formation, their own family formation, there are better pathways of decision making that have huge implications over the rest of their life. So that was the first thing I've noticed in like my 30 years working with lots of different types of young people who were able to break the cycle of disadvantage. The second observation I've had is that these young people typically lived by a moral code. They had a personal faith commitment. They had a belief or they lived by a set of moral tenets. Usually that moral code came from an organized religion, whether it be Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism. It actually almost didn't matter. But the point was that they lived by a moral code and they were part of a community of people who loved them and who expected them to live up to that moral code. And so that's just my observation that that was another central element. So religion.
Mm,
And this third observation I had was education, that young people able to break the cycle of disadvantage typically benefited from some kind of educational freedom or school choice, charter schools. And so, because otherwise, imagine if you live in a neighborhood where only 7% of kids graduate from high school ready for college, and you don't have a choice. You have no, your restrictions, you have to go to those schools. And so that was the third element. And then finally, this last element, if you're on the pathway to form a strong family, if you have a personal faith commitment through religion, if you've benefited from education freedom, those three typically led to a young person having an entrepreneurial mindset, an overcomer's mindset, so that when you face inevitable challenges, you were either part of a network of people that loved you and could support you, or you live by a moral code to help you make good and tough decisions. But that's my framework: family, religion, education,
mm.
entrepreneurship, free. And so those are the institutions that I say this isn't about a young person needing to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. These are about helping young people know that agency is individually practiced, but socially empowered, right? So think of agency like a vector or a velocity, where velocity is not just speed, it's speed and direction. So
Mm.
in which direction? How do you know? How do you know in which direction to wield your agency? And that's the framework free that I'm really trying to help more young people understand, regardless of your circumstance. You can lead the life of your own choosing, and you don't have to do it alone. And these four pillars, family, religion, education, entrepreneurship, can help make all the difference.
Is part of what you notice that the from, if the circumstances from are not ideal in the absence of what you're saying, the sequence, the likelihood is the person falls into some type
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
regression. So
Yeah.
there's an
And they've got to be
intentionality
almost
there. It's a new
superhuman.
narrative. Yeah,
Yeah.
go.
They've almost got
You
to be
can.
superhuman. In the absence of someone showing you a different pathway, that void is going to be filled,
And
right?
you were noticing people repeat the patterns even though they consciously weren't. Oh yeah, I want to repeat this.
Oh no, exactly. That's
It
why.
just happens in the absence of some type of sequence or something. And,
Well, that's the thing. And so, I write in the book of this concept of there are these two meta narratives, right? So let's say you're in a really challenging situation. Typically, you're hearing two narratives. One
uh,
is what I call blame the system, and the other is blame the victim. The blame the system narrative is basically saying, kid, you're right. All these systems are screwed up. America is racist, it's oppressive. All these systems are rigged against you. And you hear that over and over and over and over again, and you just start to think, I guess it's true. I mean, what power do I have, right? And and so that could
mm,
lead a young person to feel like someone else has to solve this problem, like, or I've got to become Superman, right? So a blame the system narrative is really debilitating because it suggests that you don't have the ability to overcome these institutional barriers, right? But then there's another narrative that's really important to also acknowledge, and that's blame the victim. That's a narrative that's also debilitating because it says, wait a minute, America is great. America is the land of opportunity. If you're not successful, it's your fault, right? But if you're 8 years old and you live in the South Bronx and only 7% of kids graduate from high school ready for college, it's really hard to blame you as a kid, right? So between blame the victim and blame the
mm,
system, for a kid, you either hear the message, the system is rigged against you, or it's your fault for not getting over the system. Both of those cripple a young person's sense that they can lead a self-determined life. So I'm offering agency as an empowering alternative to blame the system and blame the victim. Because in the absence of someone or some institution laying out for you what is possible and here's how, you're going to fall prey to one of these two narratives. And that's what I'm fighting against.
Where does courage, justice,
Justice.
temperance, wisdom come
Yes.
into this?
So one of the things that I feel is so important in my work is I don't just write about these things. I try to say, how do I bring these ideas into the real world, right? And so one of the things I said was that young people able to break the cycle of disadvantage typically live by some kind of moral code, right? Sometimes informed by religious belief, but this idea that there are a set of core values. And so one of the things I decided to do was run schools, right? And if you run schools, if you have an institution where you have kids for 8 to 10 hours per day, then you are in the moral formation business. You
Mm.
like it or not. Whether or not you're intentional or deliberate about it, so even if you choose not to do anything about moral formation or character development, that void is filled, right? It's going to be filled by people who don't necessarily agree with your values. So one of the first things that we did at Vertex Partnership Academies, the high school that we've launched in the Bronx, is organize it around the four cardinal virtues of courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. And they're the cardinal virtues from the Latin root cardo, which means hinge. So all other standards of moral excellence are built off of the four cardinal virtues. So optimism, determination, perseverance, gratitude, resilience, all of those things, all of those character-based strengths emanate from courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. So, so we have built a school around those virtues that we think help to create the moral foundation that then helps build the sense of agency, personal agency that young people can have in their own lives.
What relationship does the adoption of these values have for a young person in overcoming like actual
Yeah.
challenges that face them in
Sure.
your
Sure. So when we first launched the Vertex Partnership Academies, that was in 2022, we just had these four virtues. But then the thing was, if you ask one kid, well, what does courage mean to you? Or another kid, what does courage mean to you? You'll get different definitions. So we said, you know what? Let's create what we call I statements, right? And so for courage, the I statement is I reject victimhood and boldly persevere even in times of uncertainty and struggle. Actually, when you heard me speak in London at the ARC Forum, I had the entire audience,
Yes, it was amazing.
1,000, yeah, recite those words. It was a goosebump moment. It was a goosebump moment. And the idea is that when young people who when the outside community is telling them you're just a victim of circumstance and all these systems are rigged against you, but when our students stand up together in unison saying those words, in their beautiful blazers and ties, I reject victimhood and boldly persevere, even in times of uncertainty and struggle. It's more than just saying those words in your head or even singing by yourself. But when you're all standing up together in unison, it's a collective commitment for how we are going to operate together. So it almost
Mm.
becomes like an armor around negative messages externally. And the
Yeah, I
same
was going to ask how that exercise almost like it's shielding from the macro conflicts that are happening, the
100%.
the meta narratives at battle. That Jung said, people don't have ideas, ideas have people. There's this battle going on, and you're
Yes.
creating this. I see the visual like if you could elaborate, like a shield almost around the,
Yeah, that's beautiful
like
what
in
you said.
sci-fi type movies where there's the shield around Mars or something. Like we can
Yes.
breathe in this, on Mars. We
Yes.
have the okay.
It's like we're an oasis at our school, right? So even temperance. I lead my life with self-discipline because I am responsible for my learning and behavior. These are extremely powerful words because what it's saying to each other is that again, it's I don't have to do this alone, but I lead my life with self-discipline, right? So that speaks of self-restraint, delayed gratification. These are all concepts that we then bring to life through the literature, through the books that we teach. So the virtues and the I statements are the anchor, and then we have service activities, we have classes, we have again literature that reinforces these concepts. But you're exactly right. To imagine like a dome, you know, um, where there's all these negative messages trying to get in, you're black, and so therefore you're inherently marginalized, or you're a woman, or you're this, or you're that, or you're poor. And so that must mean X. And
Ian,
our
our audience may not be fully even familiar or tuned into what's happening to younger generation now that I think about that. What
oh,
are some of the ideological obstacles for young? We have a lot of entrepreneurs and executives listen to the show. They have kids in school. Of course, in the recent years, some people have, because they have means, they brought kids out of schools. There's a lot of angst around what to do.
well,
What
think about
are the ideological obstacles in your view?
Yeah, well, think about this. The journal Education Next in January put out a study where they asked high school students across the country in the United States, what are some of the key messages you've heard from your teachers over the last 4 years, over the course of your high school experience? And it's really an extraordinary study. But one of the questions said that 70% of high school students heard from their teachers that America is an inherently racist nation. And
70%?
70% and 40% said they heard that message from their teachers often or almost daily. So you think about that. Think about that. If you're if you're hearing from your teachers, right, your most local authority, that the country you live in
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
is inherently racist, right? And a good chunk, almost half the time, you're hearing it often or almost daily. What does that do?
Well, it's like a supplement company. The manager saying that there's poison in these pills.
Exactly.
I'm thinking in like a business context, right? Like,
Sure.
I know you were in yeah, MBA. Like it would be like the company saying our products are terrible.
Right. So what would you be led to believe, right? If you're let's say you're a black kid, let's say you're a white kid. Let's say you're a white kid and you hear that message. Wait a minute, does that mean I'm inherently that way? And so there's another study
Wow.
that's been done for the last 20, 30 years. And there's a statement that high school students are asked, do you agree with this statement or not? Despite its flaws, America's system of doing things is still the best in the world. In the 70s, 70% of high school seniors said yes to that question. Today, that number is only 22%.
Wow.
So there is this sense of kind of an eroding belief in our country amongst the rising generation. And perniciously, sometimes that's around issues of race, gender, class. And so those are the kinds of meta narratives that we think are doing great harm to young people's perceptions about who they are as individuals, what they have the ability to achieve in our country. The reason you hear so many young people talk about, well, is the American dream even still real? We think it comes from some of these meta narratives. And so, what we've set out to do at our school, and hopefully through our messaging around agency and free, is to have more young people understand that there are pathways to your own prosperity, that there are pathways to the life that you want to lead. And you don't have to do it alone, but there are institutions that really matter. And those institutions, in our view, and certainly in my view, family, religion, education, entrepreneurship. If you're able to embrace those, then it's not saying that life is just nirvana and everything's perfect, but that you will have the armor, you will have the weapons, you will have the tools of self-renewal that make it possible to lead the life that you want.
I want to make sure I'm following the as our macro culture goes through this or is in this friction, there's potentially unintentional consequences
Yep.
on the institutions like the schools,
Yes.
and in the absence of that alignment outside of school, it can be hard to help the kids at the end of the day.
Well, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So if you hear over and over and over again that systems are rigged against you or that you're going to be oppressed because of things like your skin color, your gender, or your geography, after a while you start to believe it, right? After a while you start to think, okay, that's just kind of the way it is. And it's not that you surrender, it's just that you don't feel that you have the agency to lead a very different life. And that's why I said at the beginning,
Hmm.
I've seen many young people in tough situations make decisions where they recreate same outcomes. And yet there are other young people who have a different criteria for decision making. And what makes the difference? And that's what we're really trying to hone in on. And with some success, I think we're able to highlight young people who have a very different view of what's possible.
Like for example, let's say that a young person has instability in the home, but it may be stability outside of it, mentors, advisors, that teacher, that place that's giving them
Yes.
a precondition to agency. It may, part of and it's the instability in the home could at the same time be giving them almost like the I'm pulling back a bow,
Right.
the tension necessary to shoot a farther target. And I still
You
have to have an aim though,
you
and
still
that
have
you're
to
providing
aim.
the aim. You're providing
That
the
is a,
aim.
that is a beautiful metaphor. You still have to have the aim. What is it that
But
I'm
if I don't believe that I can do it, I guess that's where you're. If I as the individual, I have that instability, and the people outside of the from piece where I'm from, the people outside, not necessarily family, the
Yep.
people in the community are all convincing me don't even try. It's corrupt business. I'm never going to use that energy of a
Right.
lack of resources. I'm
And that,
trying to
yeah, no, and that
conceptualize
is,
your
yeah, and that's what's called learned helplessness. There's a psychological
really.
word for it, learned helplessness, where you just get to a point where I just think it's not possible, or whatever's possible is heavily constrained. And we just reject that idea. And again, this is not being naive. This is not saying that you're not going to face barriers or you're not going to face challenges, but you have the quivers, you have the tools within your toolbox to lead a very different life where those obstacles aren't going to be determinative. What's more determinative is you.
What do you see from the children that so you now you have high schools, right? But you all it was younger as well, right?
Yeah,
Pre-K,
before it was
kindergarten.
elementary, right, exactly. Before I ran pre-K through eighth grade.
What did you see, anecdotally in the spirit of the children when they're offered these concepts?
Oh yeah, I mean, I just presented to our juniors last week, and we had this whole discussion about making opportunities that are offered become opportunities that are taken.
Hmm.
These opportunities offered have to become opportunities taken, and it's a really powerful concept because our students know that they have to get into a position where there's a landscape of opportunity, but then they have to have the courage, the justice, the temperance, the wisdom to
Yeah.
say, okay, that can mean something different in my life, because sometimes the worst thing is for some kids, the opportunities never come. And I'm working very hard to create things like school choice and other ways that more young people can even get in the game. But then there's another level where young people have it's like it's within your grasp and they don't have the wherewithal to take it. And that's where we're trying to do the full bit. Both create the opportunities that
Mm,
create the sense of agency that young people know, all right, I'm gonna hop on that. I'm gonna regardless of challenges, but this, for example, we're hoping all of our juniors have what are called pre-college summer experiences this summer, right? So they can get on the campus
wow.
at Harvard, get on the campus of Cornell,
Wow.
get on the campus of Cambridge in England, in Japan, all these different places, because it's those experiences, 1 to 2 to 3 week experiences on college campuses where they're in an amphitheater, they're with other students from all across the world. And you know what? They're there on equal footing. They're there on equal footing. They deserve to be there just like any other kid. And that experience lets them know that when they're applying to college, the next year, why not me? Why not me? Of course, I deserve to be here. I can compete. I'm just as smart. I'm just, and I'm better. You know what I mean? That's
I want the listeners to really take this because we have many entrepreneurs and listen. Like the biggest regret of my life was that I didn't.
take your shot.
I no, like yeah, Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and in fact, my wife, yeah, she, we went to that play because she's like, you remind me of him. Funny
Mm.
enough. No, that's a regret, a deep regret.
But it's never
Um,
too late. Here's the thing, it's never too late. There's probably something in your life right now, today, that, gosh, what if I went for it? You know? Am I prepared? So, because it's not saying be naive and just go after it's like, what if I really went for that? Am I prepared for it? Do I know because I literally in my conversation with the juniors a week ago, I think it was March, whatever the day was. So I put up the calendar date for that day in 2026. And I said,
wow.
here's what I want to be true for each of you on this date 1 year from now. I want each of you to have 2 to 3 offers from the colleges that you want. I want each of you, if you want to go that path, to have 1 to 2 job offers from places that you want to go into their employ. I want you to have significant financial aid and we had a conversation about what has to happen between today and a year from now on this date to make sure what do you need to put in place and what do we as an institution need to help you get to that place. So there's always this message, your effort matters, and the institution
Mm.
that's grasping you, we're going to work together. That's the idea. So agency is individually practiced, but socially empowered.
What types of pressures are faculty under? And I'm asking because I'm it's I want to play I was thinking for a second, God, if only you what because I remember maybe I would have gone and taken the SAT if I was at your school.
Oh no, you definitely would. You wouldn't have a
Yeah,
choice.
you would make me
You
where I
wouldn't
was
have a
like,
choice. You
I'm
would have
trying
taken
to
the
have
PSAT.
compassion.
No, no, no. You would have been required to take the PSAT to, again, it's like, what are the steps to get on the pathway? Right? So often we spend like, why didn't you get to X? Why is it? It's like, okay, because XYZ requires a lot of ABC steps
Yeah.
to get there that are a lot more digestible, right? So how do we, for example, pre-college experiences? So if you're terrified of applying to Harvard and like, well, maybe take a week-long class where you're at Harvard, where you can see, like, wow, this is pretty cool. And I'm seeing kids from all over the world that, maybe they might have some different experiences than me, but guess what? I have different experiences than them, and I have value, right? And then I discover, as was announced last week, Harvard is free to any kid that earns their
Oh yeah.
$250,000 or less. And it's not just about Harvard, and it's not even just about college. The point is, we built a school that's all about ensuring young people have choices, that you have options, right? If you want to go to an incredible school like a Harvard or go to school in overseas or go to your local community college, whatever it is, it's about you controlling your own destiny. And here are the ingredients to do it.
Mm. So Vertex Partnership Academies, for how? can people contribute, or what is it today? What does it look like? It's a charter
It's a public charter
scaling?
school, and,
Okay.
it's grades 9 through 12, because after running a network of elementary and middle schools, pre-K through 8, for 10 years, and we did some amazing things there. But the biggest challenge was what happens after 8th grade? Like, where do these kids go? And so I've decided to build a network of international baccalaureate public charter high schools.
Mm.
And the whole idea is to make it so that one of my beliefs is that college is great, but it isn't necessarily, it doesn't have to be the only immediate option after high school, right? That if a young person wants to go into the trades or get a credential in biomedical, we're even working with Northwell Health to pursue options like phlebotomy, which is the ability to
Oh,
take blood,
yeah.
right? Well, you can graduate from high school with a credential in phlebotomy, immediately start making money and enter the healthcare field if that's what you so choose. And so that's what we've now created with Vertex Partnership Academies, this virtues based, it's organized around the four cardinal virtues, international baccalaureate, high school with these multiple pathways. And so, if I mean, we would love the support because we're both supported philanthropically, as well as through public funds. And the idea with a public charter school is that once you hit a certain number of students, once you reach maturity, you're
Mm.
able to exist forever on public dollars. So it's a
What
big,
is a charter school for those that don't even know? They never
right.
heard of it.
So,
I have
so
this Sowell book in my Audible,
oh
and I
yeah,
haven't
there it
yet
is.
listened to
Charter
the
schools
whole.
and their enemies. Yes,
Yeah, that's a goal to listen to that. What is a, so maybe this will give me some accountability.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
What is a charter school for those that are not aware of that
yeah.
concept?
So about 25 years ago, as there is today, there was a lot of frustration with the traditional public school system. And a few people came together with this idea is that could we create a public school but a different type of public school that had more freedom. So you trade autonomy for accountability. So in a public charter school, you typically are free to hire and fire your own teachers. You can pay them whatever you want. You can choose your own curriculum. You can choose your own discipline system. And in return for that, you have to hit these academic benchmarks to demonstrate that you're doing a really good job. So the public charter system has now, I think we're like educating maybe 4 million kids across the
Wow.
country. And I think it's an amazing um, um, network that now gives parents more options because typically charter schools are located in low income communities where the current choices are not very good. And the way we work is you typically get a certain amount of money per pupil from the public system. Usually it's less than what traditional school systems get. So you make up for that difference by raising philanthropy. But the idea is that within 3 or 4 years, you are able to have enough students where that school system can now operate on public dollars. So, from a
Mm.
philanthropic perspective, it's what I call a model of finite philanthropy. So we don't have to keep coming back hat in
Like
hand.
venture capital or something.
Yeah, well, I mean, even in venture capital, there's a period of time that you're funding before the business becomes self-sustaining.
Yeah.
The same is true in a public charter school that once you hit a certain number of kids, you're self-sustaining on public dollars.
And where is the physical school?
It's in the Bronx. It's in the Sound View section of the Bronx. And, with all good energy, we'll be opening up more schools in the latter part of this decade. Because the whole idea, unfortunately, is that there's huge demand. When I say our district, only 7% of kids graduate from high school ready for college.
Wow.
Situation exists throughout New York City, other parts of New York State, New Jersey, Chicago, Dallas, Los Angeles, Appalachia. And
What
so,
kind of data or yeah, outcome differential is there with the charter approach, with the more autonomous approach?
yeah.
Is it orders of magnitude greater in out? comes?
So I will always say not every charter school is great. So I am one of the charter leaders who tries to be very honest about our overall outcomes. But that said, overall, charters typically outperform their district peer schools in standardized test scores, in things like chess competitions and arts and music and it's very powerful. And so and again, there and that said, I mean, there's some charter schools which are, Success Academy. We think Vertex Partnership Academies is a phenomenal new school on the horizon. But if you're a parent and you live in a community where you're constrained to only send your kid to schools that have unfortunately been failing that community for generations, a charter school can be a lifeline. It can be a
Mm,
lifeline, and as I said before, in my experience, educational freedom was one of the steps towards this path of agency, right? If you don't have that, and you're from a not from a strong family, like where are you going to learn these elements? Like where are you going to learn about what your life can be? And so
mm.
that's why, again, this framework of family, religion, education, entrepreneurship. I mean, schools are great, but as I learned, even when I saw that Who's Your Daddy truck from the very beginning of our conversation, families matter too. And as I discovered, religion and faith matter. And what we try to say is we're not being prescriptive. We're not telling you as a kid, you must do this, but we're saying if you want to lead a life of agency, these are the pillars that really matter.
So is it not what to believe, but that to believe?
It's that, yeah, it's that. Look,
To
here's the deal.
believe in something, to have an
Yes.
aim towards your legacy. If I don't know where I come from, I better form something that I could consider my own and be responsible for or accountable to, and that therefore preempts responsibility, personal responsibility.
Right. So we have this concept called the life deciding decade, the period of time from age 14 to age 24, where the decision a young person makes around
Wow.
relationships, education, work, your faith, like the quality of the decisions you make during that period of time has a huge impact over the quality of the rest of your life. Now, it's not
Mm.
completely determinative, right? Because you can always change, even at, age 30, 40, you can always make a change. But the better decisions during that period of time, your life can be set, right? And so that's the idea that you are the architect, you're the agent of your own uplift, right? So we're not telling you what to do, but we're trying to say there are a lot of young people who've crossed, who've walked in your shoes before. And so we've built some wisdom around the sets of decisions that are going to most likely influence your life in terms of your economic status, your relationships, the extent to which you experience human flourishing. There's wisdom around those things. We're going to give you that info, but ultimately, you're the architect of your own decisions. And that's the key. That's what agency is all about.
How did you get connected to ARC, Alliance of Responsible Citizenship?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think, through my many travels and speaking about these issues, sort of like you know, we need a moral renaissance. And I've started to interact with the leadership of ARC, David and Philippa Stroud. And when we talked, there was a lot that we had in common. They were talking about societal renewal
Mm.
and cultural renewal. Well, guess what? A lot of that starts with individual renewal. You know, there's a great quote by Alexis de Tocqueville,
Oh,
who, when he
there's the
was
book right there.
observing, oh, there it is. When he was observing America, he wrote Democracy in America, and he has this amazing quote where he says, "The greatness of America lies not in being more exceptional than any other nation, but rather in her ability to repair her faults."
Mm.
Really love that quote because it suggests that as a country, as a nation, we have the tools of self renewal and self-betterment towards this becoming a more perfect union, right? The ability to repair her faults. Well, that's wonderful. And our students recite the preamble to the US Constitution every day, we the people, to instill this idea that our students have the tools of self-renewal and self-betterment towards becoming a more perfect person, a better individual. And so I think the folks from ARC, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, we saw a connection between the work that they're trying to do between cultural renewal and social renewal and the work we're doing, which is all about individual renewal through the importance of these mediating institutions. And I had the honor then of speaking on the
Yeah.
main stage in London. So that was pretty inspiring.
And I saw you at the panel or the after hours with
Oh,
Eric
yes.
Komisar, and
Yes.
that was the one I wanted to go to because all of this is a consequence of everything that you talk about. This show wouldn't exist, Culture Matters wouldn't exist. I want you to know, like what you're doing is I'm just one of those students that you know
Well, we're
trying
all,
to
yeah.
figure it out.
Well, that's the thing. And young people deserve to have us as the grown-ups, as who have us who've built this wisdom, help them figure it out. They don't have to do it on their own. This is the key. We deprive young people so much of the things that we know are crucial, are indispensable to human flourishing. We know that family matters. And yes, you might be in a really tough situation with your own family, but it doesn't have to be that way for
Mm.
you going forward, right? We know that having some kind of personal faith commitment matters, like some kind of moral code. We know these things. We know that education really matters. So then let's make it possible for more young people to have access to a great education.
In closing, how can people participate in what you're doing, Vertex Partnerships Academies? Like, how do they get in contact with you fastest to that many of our listeners will want to participate and help you grow this financially, socially, emotionally, come out there and see what you have going on. So,
So among many things that we do, we have a leadership lecture series where we have people from all over the country come and speak to our students. So one of the very first things you can do is just come share what you know, share your story. The thing that is so inspiring for many of our students is that moment when we put them in a position where they can see a reality that they had never conceived, right? When we bring in a criminal justice attorney or someone who writes legislation or someone, who's worked in entertainment, or, folks who have just like, wow, that's so cool. And our students not only get to see the end point, but when they get the interaction opportunity to interact with someone, they get to see the process. What were you thinking when you were 16 years old? Right? How did you even start to believe these things? I mean, last year our students actually had the opportunity to visit Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas in his chamber.
wow.
And he talked to our students about when he was growing up, he knew freed slaves, people who at one time were slaves, and he told this to our students that what they said to him was that old man Kant is dead. Old man Kant is dead, right? This idea that you can't do something, no, 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 no. Old man Kant is dead. And just all those experiences. So one way that you could, so come to our website, vertexacademies.org. You can sign up for a visit. And then each visit, we like to have our guests speak to our
Wow.
students about the life that they've led and why and how that when they were 16, how they were able to see a different vision for themselves. Obviously, philanthropic support would be amazing. And again, if you go to vertexacademies.org, we certainly would appreciate that. But we're trying to build an institution, not only in the Bronx, but all over the country that can be replicated with this mindset, as well as these very practical elements, the cardinal virtues, the multiple pathways, the international baccalaureate, all of these things are mechanisms that can be replicated in any school in the country.
need those domes so people can breathe agency into their life. If you're listening to this, share this with someone that you care about, especially parent with children that needs to think about these topics. And please buy agency Ian V Rowe ROWE. Listen to this a couple times. Please share this with a friend. We will see you next time on the Culture Matters podcast. Thank you so much, Ian.
Thank you, Jason. This was awesome. Great conversation.